Congratulations, you've got an accepted offer on an investment property. Now the work begins. So we call this going into escrow or being in contract or pending sale, depending on where you are and what terminology you want to use. But at the end of the day, this is the busiest time period of buying a property. So let's break it down a little bit and talk about all of the responsibilities that you have as a buyer, some of the time frames and considerations, and everything that you have to get done during this process in order to close your deal and be a happy property owner at the end. So first and foremost, you get your signed contract, and that goes over to the escrow company and to the seller. You're now officially in contract. Typically within 3 business days, you need to get your earnest money deposit wired into the escrow company. These days, wire fraud is rampant, so make sure that you call and verify any wire information with the escrow company before sending your money, because that's a real thing. Once your earnest money deposit is with the escrow company, they hold that for you in trust, and if you need to exercise any of your contingencies and cancel the deal, that gets refunded to you when you do that. Once you waive all of your contingencies, your deposit is non-refundable, and then it counts towards your down payment and purchase price of the property at the end when you close escrow. So typical timeframes for escrow on 1 to 4 unit purchases in our area are running about 30 days right now. That should give you enough time to get through the inspections and the loan approval process. For 5 and up unit properties, that's going to run about 60 days because the lending on those properties takes a little bit longer. During that time period, you're going to have your contingency timeframes, which we talked about when you wrote your offer. And industry standard for residential properties is 17 days for your investigations and due diligence, appraisal and loan. If you're fortunate enough to get appraisal and loan contingency on a commercial sale, those are going to run a little bit longer, maybe 21 days for an appraisal, 35 to 45 days for loan approval, and then you'd be expected to waive all contingencies and work towards close. Now, it is pretty common to shorten those time periods when you're in negotiations or even waive some of those contingencies up front. So that might be faster depending on the scenario in your particular escrow. So you've got your money in escrow, you're ready to go. Now you're in your due diligence phase of your contract. So during this time is when you're going to do most of the work on the transaction. And let's say that's 17 days for your kind of industry standard deal. During that first 17 days, you're going to schedule your physical inspections as well as review all of the books and records and paper due diligence before you waive that contingency and move on, indicating that you're satisfied with the property and all of your investigations that you've done surrounding its status. So let's talk about the physical inspections first. You're probably going to hire a generalist physical inspector that's going to go to the property with you. That takes 2 to 3 hours. You're going to get into every unit. The tenants are going to have notice that you're coming. And they're going to test and look at all of the major systems in the building. So when we talk about major systems, we typically mean the roof, the foundation, plumbing, electrical, and the HVAC systems. Here in California, the HVAC systems aren't too substantial because we don't have a whole lot of weather, so that typically just involves heaters in the units, but in other parts of the country, the HVAC systems are a bigger deal. So your inspector is going to get up on the roof, check the age of that, see if there's any issues. They're going to look at the condition of the foundation, which ranges widely. We've got a lot of buildings that are 100 years old here. Sometimes the foundations are fine, sometimes they need some work. They're going to test the plumbing and see what you have there. It's still pretty common to have old galvanized plumbing, cast iron drain lines, clay sewer pipes, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes you'll see newer plumbing systems with copper supply lines or PEX or ABS drain lines. They're going to look at the electrical system. That's a hot topic these days with insurance. And sometimes we still see old knob and tube wiring and glass fuses in properties, which are certainly considered out of date. These days, ideally you see circuit breakers and modern wiring when you're doing the electrical portion of the inspection. That's pretty much it for the physical stuff. With apartment buildings, you have to be careful not to feel overwhelmed by a lot of the small things that are going to turn up in that inspection. There's almost certainly going to be an 80 to 100 page report highlighting all the deficiencies with the building, but that could include really small things like leaky faucets or a hole in a wall here or a broken doorknob or something like that. It's more important to focus on the big stuff and try and develop a budget for what you might need to spend after you close on the property to do some major repairs or upgrade units or that sort of thing. Now, during the physical inspections, you may also bring a sewer cam inspector. That's a good thing to do. Here in Southern California, it's pretty common to get a termite inspection too, because termites are a fact of life. They're in pretty much every building, and so some termite treatment might be necessary after you buy the property. It's also really common to bring out contractors related to specific systems. So it's common to bring a roofer or a plumber, electrician, if you want to get a specific bid to upgrade some of those systems, or maybe even a bid to upgrade some of the interior units if they're out of date and you're trying to add value to your property. So your investment consultant can help you develop a renovation budget during this time and figure out what additional funds you're going to have to invest in the property after close. And that's a really good thing to go through during this time period. Besides the physical investigations, you also need to review all the books and records relating to the property's historical operations so that you can forecast how the property might perform after you take ownership. So we call this due diligence, or paper due diligence, whatever you want to call it. Now that includes getting copies of profit and loss statements from the seller, a rent roll, copies of all the leases, notices of increase, laundry lease, list of recent capital improvements or upgrades. This is a great time to see what you can find in city permit records as far as what work has been done to the building, or maybe even the original construction records. During this time is also when you want to start getting the insurance policy lined up and getting a quote for that. Once you've reviewed all of the building's expenses and utilities and stuff like that, you would compare that to a pro forma that you probably did before you got into the deal and see how the building stacks up on a forecasted basis for the incoming expenses. If it looks good and you're satisfied, great. If you feel like you need to do some additional negotiation for things that you might have uncovered regarding repairs that need to happen, or health and safety issues, or problems with the major systems, or maybe you got a major surprise on the expense side of the equation, this would be the moment when you're entitled to do some additional negotiation with the seller. So you could send them all of your support, any bids that you might have gotten during due diligence, any underwriting that you've done to adjust your cap rate and gross rent multiplier metrics. And then you would ask either for a price reduction or a credit towards your down payment and closing costs. And there would be some negotiation back and forth there before agreeing to a number or not, and then being expected to waive your investigation contingency. So let's say the seller agrees to give you a credit or do some repairs. Typically, they're going to agree to that only if you waive your due diligence contingency or your inspection contingency, whatever you want to call it. So you come to an agreement, you waive that contingency, and then you move on. You're not going to be able to go back and ask for anything later after you do that. So make sure that you're satisfied with the property and you're ready to proceed with the sale. Once all that's done, and typically kind of along at the same time, you're going to be ordering the appraisal through the lender. And the appraiser is going to come out, they're going to look at the building, compare it to all the comparable sales. They're going to do an appraisal on the income approach to value if you're buying a commercial sized property, or on the sales comparison method if you're buying a 1 to 4 unit property, and then they're going to deliver the report back to the lender. If the appraisal comes in at the contract price, great, you'd be expected to then waive your appraisal contingency. If it comes in below the contract price, or there are other issues with the appraisal such as required repairs, you would then also potentially renegotiate either a price or repairs or credits, and then be expected to waive your appraisal contingency. Once all of that's back in with the lender, they're going to send your loan to underwriting and credit committee, and eventually you get loan approval. That's towards the end of the process. Once you have loan approval, you'd be expected to waive your financing contingency. If something goes wrong with your loan and it gets declined and you have a financing contingency, you would be able to then cancel the deal, back out, and get your deposit back. Typically with commercial deals, you don't often see loans get totally declined. It's more common that if there's an issue with the loan or the appraisal, that they would adjust the final loan amount. So it's a good idea to have a little bit of extra cash to put down if you need to when you're going into those types of deals. Once that's all buttoned up and your loan is approved, you'd be expected at that point to waive all of your contingencies. So you sign off on a contingency waiver form, and at that point your deposit is non-refundable. It counts towards the down payment and purchase price, and it transfers over to the seller after the deal closes through escrow. Now, throughout this process, there's some other additional items that you're going to need to consider too. If you plan on vesting title in an LLC or a trust, you want to make sure that you have all that set up and get started on that early, because that can take some time. We mentioned insurance earlier, but insurance can take a couple weeks sometimes to get quotes as well. So make sure that you get your insurance agent involved early in the process so you can understand your insurance expense and make sure that the building can be insured. And then, of course, if you're not going to manage the building yourself, you're going to want to make sure that property management is set up. If you're going to use a professional property manager, I highly recommend bringing them along to the inspection so they can walk through the units with you and your investment consultant, and they can give you their opinion on market rents, any upgrades that might be necessary to improve the property, and just calibrate a little bit and get to know about what would be included in their property management services. So let's say you've got all that finished and you are ready to close. The last week or so, the mechanics of that look something like this. Your loan gets approved, the lender sends your loan documents over to the escrow company, and you schedule a signing. That's when you sign a stack of papers about this thick. You can typically do that either at the escrow company's office, or a mobile notary can come to your location of choosing, and you sign all your loan documents. At that time, they typically will give you your estimated closing statement that shows exactly how much additional funds you need to wire in order to close. And then you take that, wire in your money into escrow for the down payment. Once your money is in, then your lender takes those signed loan docs and they fund your loan, and the funds come into the escrow company and go to title. And then the grant deed gets released to record the next day, at least in LA County. Once the grant deed records at the county recorder's office, you officially own the property. Congratulations. We'll talk about what to do after close in the next video.